Good morning, students. So we will continue with another example of dynamic programming. And as I said last day, that we will talk about sequence alignment problem today. And the specific sequence alignment problem that we are going to take up is relevant to molecular genetics, in computational biology, and we will be looking into homologous DNA sequence alignment. However, before we start with this, we have to get acquainted with some terms. Some of you might have already come across these terms in your +2 biology, but this has to be done again for the completion of the description of the problem. So first of all, chromosome. So what is a chromosome? It's a long thread-like macromolecule consisting of a special compound called deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA for short. I think the entire class have heard in some form of the other or the other about DNAs. Okay. So chromosomes what are they? They are carriers of biologically expressed hereditary characteristics. Those that we acquire from our elder generations. Okay. So a DNA is composed of two complementary strands. And each strand consists of a sequence of nucleotides. Okay. Complementary strands each strand consists of a sequence of nucleotides. Now, what are nucleotides? Nucleotides, they contain a pentose sugar, okay, which is also called the deoxyribose, a phosphate group, okay, and a purine or a pyrimidine base. So it contains a pentose sugar, a phosphate group, and a purine or a pyrimidine base. Okay. Purines are of two types: adenine, represented by uppercase A, and guanine, represented by uppercase G. Pyrimidines are again of two types: cytosine, represented by C, and thymine, represented by T. Okay. Now these strands are joined by hydrogen bonds, forming a right-handed double helical structure. I guess you have heard of this multiple times at different occasions. Okay. Further, in this bonding, adenine always pairs with thymine. Okay. And guanine always pairs with cytosine. Okay. So each such pair is termed as a canonical base pair. For short, BP. And ACTG are called bases. So although in general we represent a DNA using a double helix structure, for our purposes, I mean for algorithmic handling, we would just consider them as a string of characters. So the two strands might look like as follows. And this red arrows are an indicative of the hydrogen bonds which holds them together. So now consider the DNA sequence of a particular species. Now, what happens is that in a biological process, okay, so there are few things that could get modified. So a DNA sequence is a section of the DNA, okay, like this one. So this is a long strain, okay. This is one particular section which we call a DNA sequence, okay. Now a site, this is the location of a particular base pair. So a site is called the location of a particular base pair. Now, as I was telling you that over generations, a DNA sequence can undergo a substitution, okay, mutation, that is one nucleotide is substituted by another, or an insertion mutation which means a base pair is inserted in the sequence, or a deletion mutation. A deletion mutation, which means a base pair gets deleted from the sequence. So through mutation, generation after generation, the DNA sequence changes from generation to generation. Okay. Now this can have various effects. So one effect could be that a particular site in the DNA sequence for all individuals of a species gets changed or mutated. Okay, so this could happen. Another thing that could happen is what is called popularly known as speciation. And what is this? This means that the members of this species start differing significantly to form significantly through series of mutations to form two or more completely new species. So this is what we call speciation. So at this point, parts of the DNA sequence have diverged significantly. Okay, and such sequences are called homologous sequences. So earlier they were the same species, but then due to continuous mutation, there has been changes in the DNA sequence at certain sites, and the change is so profuse that the species speciates into two new species, and the DNA sequences that have changed in the two new species are termed as homologous sequences. So identifying homologous sequences has applications in phylogenetic reconstruction. That is, we want to infer how distant are two species in the evolutionary sense. That is, this can have lot of implications in drug discovery, etc. Because if you have discovered drug for one species, and if that species is close to another species in terms of its distance on the phylogeny tree, then uh, probably the same drug would be used for the other species also. So that's why homologous sequences and phylogeny tree reconstruction forms a fundamental problem in molecular genetics. So one of the first things in order to compare homologous sequences is to align the homologous sequences. Okay. Suppose we have two homologous sequence of the following form. Now, as you can immediately understand that the two sequences can be aligned in multiple different ways. So I enlist here two different ways of aligning, but there can be many more. So this is one alignment. This is another alignment where this sign indicates a gap in the sequence, which could be a result of the insertion or deletion mutation. Okay. Now the question is, among all these alignments that you see, which one do we choose? Okay. So the first one, if you see here, the first alignment has two mismatched base pairs, okay, but 4 gaps. Whereas the second one has 3 mismatched base pairs, but only 2 gaps. Now, how to tell which one is better? There is no way to infer which one is better unless you associate penalties. Okay, so there could be, as you see, two types of penalties: penalty or cost of mismatch and penalty or cost of gap. Now say, for the purpose of this problem, I tell you that the penalty for the gap is 1 unit and the penalty for mismatch is 3 units. You can immediately see that the cost of this particular alignment based on this penalty values comes up to be 10, whereas the cost for this alignment comes up to be 11. So in this case, the top alignment is a better choice than the bottom alignment. However, depending on the input cost of the gap and the mismatch, we have to estimate the overall alignment cost and accordingly decide for the preferred choice. Okay. Now question is, like, there can be many such alignments, and given certain costs there can be, like, many solutions. Like, how do we, and this becomes an intractable problem. So can we use a dynamic programming approach to solve this problem? Okay, let us say that in the problem that we will talk about, we have the following assumptions without any loss of generality. Okay, so the framework that we will develop is independent of these choices, but this is just for an example. So let's say penalty for mismatch is equal to 1 and penalty for gap is equal to 2. So first, let us represent the two sequences that we have seen just now as an example as two arrays. So let's say we call the first array x0 to x9, and the second array as y0 to y7. Okay. Also, let us call opt ij as the cost of the optimal alignment of the subsequences x I to 9 and y j to 7. Okay. This means that opt 00 is the cost of the overall optimal alignment, which represents the cost of x 0 through 9 and y 0 through 7. Okay. Now, if you see carefully, the optimal alignment must start with one of the following. So, the first case is that x0 is aligned with y0. Now again, here can be two cases. One is x0 is equal to y0, which means no penalty, or x0 is not equal to y0, which means a penalty of 1. Okay. Second case, x0 is aligned with a gap, okay, in the first alignment site. So that means penalty is equal to 2, or y0 is aligned with a gap in the first alignment site. Again, this will have a penalty of 2. Now you see, from these observations, we will try to build our optimal substructure argument, which will allow us to develop the recursive relation for obtaining the value of OPT. Okay. Let us say that AOPT is the optimal alignment of x 0 through 9 with y 0 through 7. And also x0 has been aligned with y0 for argument's sake. Okay. Now, this alignment contains within it the alignment say B of x running from 1 to 9 and y running from 1 to 7. Now, if you argue that B is not an optimal alignment, then what are we essentially saying? That there is another, this would take us to saying that there is another alignment C with a smaller cost. Then C along with the alignment of x0 with y0 will yield a cost lesser than A opt. Now this is a contradiction because we have assumed that A opt is the optimal alignment which will result in the smallest cost. Therefore, B must also be an optimal alignment. Now note that this argument holds also when either x0 is aligned with a gap or y0 is aligned with a gap. The same argument also holds there. Okay. So therefore, every time you have a larger alignment that is optimal, the sub alignments that this alignment is built on top of are also themselves optimal. Okay. So this is the crux of the dynamic programming approach that we are going to build now. Now suppose the following is an optimal alignment. Okay, so let us assume that this is a optimal alignment. This is an optimal alignment. Then it must hold that this sub-alignment ranging from x1 to 9 and y1 to 7 is also optimal. Now, given this observation, we can easily write the recursive relation. Let's say penalty is equal to 0 if x0 is equal to y0, else 1. Okay. So the recursive property to obtain OPT 00 should be minimum of OPT 11 plus penalty, okay, depending on whether x1 is aligned with y1, comma, OPT 10 plus 2, because this is a gap, and OPT 01 plus 2, because again this is a gap. And now this is not only true for 00. For any arbitrary ij, we can generalize this relationship. OPT ij is minimum of OPT I plus 1 j plus 1 plus penalty OPT I plus 1 j plus 2 and OPT I j plus 1 plus 2. The only thing left here is to construct the terminal conditions. So how to terminate? Again, there are two cases for termination. Okay. First one, let M be the length of sequence X and n be the length of sequence Y. Okay. Now, let's say if we have passed the end of sequence X, that is, my I has become equal to M, and we are at position J in the sequence Y, okay, where J is strictly less than A, then what we have to do? We have to insert. So the sequence I has finished and J has not, and the sequence, sorry, the sequence X has finished while the sequence Y has not finished, and there are some places at the end which need to be filled up, which is from the J plus 1th position to the nth position. Okay, so these positions therefore need to be filled up with gaps. So in this case, the cost OPT MJ is equal to n minus j. So there are n minus j gaps that needs to be filled, each costing a penalty of 2. Okay. Similarly, the other side. So if this is the case 2, if we have passed end the sequence Y, that is in this case J is already equal to n, okay, and we are at the ith position in sequence X, and I is strictly less than M, then we have to fill M minus I gaps. So in this case, OPTIN is equal to 2 into M minus I. So these are our two base conditions. Okay. Now, in order to achieve the dynamic programming, okay, we will construct a table, okay, with M plus 1 and N plus 1 dimensions. The extra dimension is just for the ease of initialization. Okay, and now using the recursive formula that we have just now developed, we can build the table. Let's say that we have, for our example, the same two DNA sequences that we were looking at. Okay. So recall that OPTIJ is minimum of OPT I plus 1 J plus 1 plus penalty, comma OPT I plus 1 comma J plus 2 comma OPT I J plus 1 plus 2. And in this particular case, OPT 10J is equal to 2 into 8 minus J, and OPT I8 OPT I8 is equal to 2 into 10 minus I. Okay, so we are considering the specific example that we saw in the previous slides. Now, if you think carefully, what are you doing? So you have, let's say, we construct the table here. So now you see that if we have to construct OPT 65, that is this cell here, okay, if we have to construct this particular cell here, OPT 65, then the imports will come from here, from OPT 66, it will come from OPT 75, and it will come from OPT 76. Okay, so this comes with a +2 on it, inserting a gap. This also comes with a +2 on it, inserting a gap, and this comes with a +1 or 0, depending on whether the characters match or not. Okay, so therefore, so our result will be here. Okay, this is the cost of the alignment. Okay, now we have to then start, but we have to start building the, as you see, we have to start building our table from the bottom. Okay, and in general, in a diagonal fashion. So we will first get this particular cell, then these two cells, then these three cells, and so on and so forth. So this is what we call the diagonal 1, diagonal 2, diagonal 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, so diagonal 1 is basically OPT 10, 8, right? And this is, as you see, a boundary condition 2 into 10 minus 10, that is 0. Okay. Diagonal 2, there are two elements, OPT 9, 8, that is 2 into 10 minus 9, that is 2, and OPT 10, 7, okay, that is 2 into 8 minus 7, that is again 2. Similarly, you can compute elements of diagonal 3. Diagonal 3, OPT 8, 8, that is 2 into 10 minus 8, that is 4. Next is OPT 9, 7. This one actually has asked us to invoke the recursion. So this is minimum of 0 plus 1, 2 plus 2, and 2 plus 2. We are obtaining this from the previous OPTs. This is 1. And the third entry in the diagonal, that is OPT 10, 6, which is 2 into 8 minus 6, that is 4. In this way, you can fill up each and every cell of this particular table. Once we have filled it up, the table would look as follows. So I'll write down the elements of the table, but I would request you to yourself compute the table elements and also try to write a code fragment for this. This is not a very difficult code. Okay, so I would request you to try and write a code for computing this sequence alignment end to end. This would be a nice exercise. So in this way, you can fill up the whole table. Now see that by building this table, you have only found out the cost of the optimal alignment. We have still not found out the exact optimal alignment. So we have to now actually try to see how we can from this table build the actual alignment, required alignment that gives us this cost. So the cost of the alignment, the optimal cost for the alignment is 7, that we have already known now. So can we use this table somehow to further compute the exact optimal alignment? Let's see if we can do this. So we have to first identify a path. We have to trace a path through which we have, got this value 7. We have to somehow trace the path backward. So once we have built the table from this cell, from this particular cell to this particular cell, now we have to find out, we have to move in the opposite direction to trace the path as to how we reached 7. So let us say we take the following steps. Choose array slot 0, 0. Okay. Now you have to find the array item on the path that resulted in this number, in this cost. So we have 3 options. As I said, you can check slot 0, 1. Okay. Now in this case, if you would have come from 0, 1, a gap would have been inserted. Okay. So if you would have come from 0, 1, then a gap would have been inserted. Okay. So then the cost would be OPT 0, 1 plus 2, that is 8 plus 2, that is 10, which is not equal to 7. Therefore, you have not come through the path of 8. Okay, that you can immediately conclude. Now then, the next array slot that we have to check is slot 1, 0. Okay, again this is a gap slot. So we see opt 1, 0 plus 2, which is, in this case, if we had come from here, 6 plus 2, that is 8, and this is not equal to 7. So therefore we have not come from this path also. So the last option left is slot 1, 1. Okay. So this will be OPT 1, 1 plus penalty. Now you see 1, 1, what has happened in this case? What will be the penalty? The penalty in this case is, since x0 is not equal to y0, okay, so penalty is equal to 1. So OPT 1 1 plus 1 is equal to 6 plus 1, that is 7. So therefore we conclude that we have taken this particular route. Okay, so from 6 we have obtained 7 by adding the penalty factor 1. In this way you can now keep going backward. And in each step you can try to find from where did you get the next number. Okay, so if you trace back, the numbers that I have circled is what you will get. So this actually traces back the path through which you have arrived at 7. So there is one important observation to make here, and I think you have already guessed it. Okay, so the observation that I am talking about is the following. So the observation, I guess you have already made, but let us try to articulate it, is that now if you move on these circles, you will actually get the alignment. You have to trickily move on these circles. Like, let me try to draw here, then from here to 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 here, here to here, here to here, here to here, here and here. So it's like a, match mismatch, match mismatch, gap, match mismatch, match mismatch, match mismatch, match mismatch, gap, match mismatch, and match mismatch. Okay, so now how do we construct this route? So we start from the bottom right corner, as I have already shown you. Then what do you do? So every time we make a diagonal move, on the circle, sorry, on the path, or I mean the circle that I have made here. Okay, to arrive at slot ij, we place the character in the ith row into sequence X and jth column into sequence Y. So every time we move up directly, okay, to arrive at slot ij. We place the character in the ith row in sequence X and a gap in sequence Y. Okay. Similarly, every time we make a move directly to the left to arrive at slot ij, we place the character at jth column in sequence Y and a gap in sequence X. So in this way, if we proceed backward, okay, so you start from here, from the bottom right corner, and then if you are moving diagonally, then you place the ith character and the jth characters in the XY sequences respectively, and you keep on doing this. However, if you have reached from bottom to top, then moving up, then what you have to do is you put the ith row character in sequence A and fill the corresponding sequence in Y, corresponding place in Y sequence with a gap. And similarly, if you move from left, if you have moved to the left from right, then you do the opposite thing. That is, you put in the sequence Y the character from the jth column, and in sequence X you put a gap. So if you do this with this particular example, you will see that we arrive at the following sequence. So the sequence, the optimal sequence that gives us the minimal cost for this particular example using the backtracking on the table will be see, we have introduced one gap here and we have introduced another gap here. So these are the two corresponding gaps. So in this way, using a dynamic programming approach, you can easily solve a sequence alignment problem. So there are various such sequence alignment and sequence related computations that you will frequently encounter, and you will have to use some sort of a dynamic programming approach to solve them. For instance, there are these interesting problems on finding edit distance between a pair of strings, then finding the longest common subsequence and things like that. So these are all applications of dynamic programming, and I would recommend that you study some of them and practice coding some of them. Okay, we will stop here.